Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts. Today we're going to talk about the subject before you. Its scientific name is Rumex sanguineus, variety sanguineus. I honestly don't get why they put variety sanguineus on there. I think the first sanguineus was enough, but maybe it was like, name so nice, named it twice. You got me. Agronomists baffle the crap out of me. I don't even know why they called it Rumex. In fact, I'm going to point out, normally I break down the Latin, but I can find no definition, not even in Bears and Stearns' Botanical Latin, for Rumex. Nobody seems to know where the heck the word came from. Weird. Anyway, its common name is called bloody dock, and in fact, the first time I ever saw this plant, that's what it was called, bloody dock. That's what I have always known it for as in the trade. Well, it's in the Polygonaceae family, which is the buckwheat family, but as a developing, growing horticulturist, that was not what that family was introduced to me as. In all my publications, which I still have, I keep my books, that was the knotweed family, which means this thing is related to all members of sorrel and dock. I mean, dock is an old-timey name for sorrel anyway. So French sorrel, it's its extra pretty cousin. It's also related to Vietnamese coriander, that hot season coriander substitute that spreads in pots pretty well and can be a nuisance in warmer climates than the test gardens are in. We're in 8A, I believe. So, anyway, it is related to Vietnamese coriander. It's also related to the Japanese knotweed, which is a nasty invasive. We have some of that down here. It's a good thing it can't exist far away from water, otherwise it would have eaten the south and probably punched kudzu in the face meats or the flower buds, whatever. Anyway, we'll talk about that invasive in a different video when I can find a good stand of it to photograph. Now, Rumex sanguineus is native to Europe, Southeast Asia, and Northern Africa. It grows in USDA zones 5 through 8 as a perennial. Its soil pH preference is 6.1 to 7.5, and its exposure is partial sun to full sun. But I'm going to stick an addendum in there from Test Garden experience. Full sun does not work for this plant at all. It will scorch right the heck up. These leaves will be all crispy, and it's going to look like a train wreck, I guarantee you. If you grow it in the sun, full sun in the southeast, you had better be prepared to water it religiously. And that soil had better be improved. You're going to have to put some peat moss and some perlite and some black cow compost of Nor. You're going to have to go Rambo on that. And honestly, that's a lot of work it's a lot of work that you're going to have to maintain year after year. And so I'm not a big fan of backbreaking garden labor, and I don't think any of you are. Just plant it in partial shade to shade. Seriously. It seems to grow well in shade if the soil is good enough and holds moisture good enough. And it definitely does well in part shade. Now these are doing well because they're in potting soil. You can see the soil down below there. Now, potting soil is not like garden soil. It's got stuff in it like pine bark fines and peat moss and perlite. That's what the little white nuggets you see in there are. And it holds moisture way better than the soil you walk around on, okay? So in this case, these plants are doing really well because they're up against the building, they get watered regularly, they don't really hit high heat or full sun, and they don't really stress. They might get perhaps 5 to 6 hours of direct, semi-direct sun, but after that it's shade, so they're doing really well. Now, I'm also going to point out the height and width of this plant is 1 foot to 1.5 feet. That's 18 inches, which is a pretty good per plant, but there's a reason for it. If you look very carefully at these plants here, you'll notice that they're not actually, each of these clusters is actually several plants. These were grown from seed, and so they're tightly clustered and unseparated to get them extra bushy. They'll grow right on top of each other with no problem if the nutrients in the soil are there and the moisture is there. Once they start to a fighting, though, the strongest survive, in theory, maybe. Now, they have an alternative name, and that is red vein dock, which makes sense. I mean, look at these deep red veins. I mean, the sanguineus part makes sense. This is blood red veining on here. They're very pretty. As far as foliage plants go, you can't beat it. And it's a perennial. It's a deciduous perennial, so, I mean, to heck with coleus. You got these things. Now, they will produce flowers eventually, and, you know, you can harvest the seed. It's not wise to let them really go to seed. The seed might get loose. They have been known to escape cultivation, so, but they're not an invasive, though in some wetter areas they are considered that. Now, what's interesting is that the young leaves are edible and have a spinach-like taste. Now, this leaf is probably too old to eat, but this little one here next to the pointy stick of destiny probably is safe. Since they are actually a sorrel, essentially, they do contain oxalic acid, which gives it a lemony flavor. It is not recommended that you eat the raw leaves in large amounts because it can cause gastrointestinal consequences. Oxalic acid is some pretty serious stuff when it piles up in your body. It won't kill you, but let's just say they're not inviting you to church for a while. Now, if you don't like church, that's actually probably a benefit. Just snarf down a bag and, oh, I'm sorry, I can't come to church. But anyway, yeah, you'll be in the bathroom. Now, if you really like the flavor, cooking neutralizes the acid mostly, so you can use it as a pot herb. You know, you can cook it in there with Swiss chard, which is, you know, the non-root forming version of beets. And you can get a unique tart flavor out of it, which, if you're into that sort of thing, bam, there it is. Now, I'm going to also point out that this apparently, Rumex sanguineus, is apparently a mutant form of Rumex viridis. Now, what's interesting about that, and this is kind of why I like the Rumex family, the agronomist had a funny habit of sticking secondary epithets on the back that are all color oriented. So, sanguineus means blood red or red, right? Well, viridis means it's basically a shade of green. Gee, I wonder what that plant's going to look like. It's probably, you know, this one just happened to mutate and get the red veins. Viridis is like this, but green. All green. Okay, I'm cool with this. Now, there is one other thing I need to mention, and I covered this sort of briefly. This plant can become invasive in wet soils, particularly near bodies of water, so you always want to remove the flower stalks to prevent it from getting loose. There are instances around the country where it's gotten loose, and, you know, realistically, since it's an edible herb, I'm not seeing how that's a problem, unless you think you're too highfalutin to eat mostly safe greens. But, you know, not everybody's hip to that, and so, I mean, if that's not your jam, that's just not your jam. Now, why do you want this in your garden? Well, as I joked earlier, it's like coleus, but it doesn't die every year. That's a win. Coleus, ironically, is also in the mint family. I'm just putting that out there. The pretty leaves are totally worth it, and the older the clumps get, the bigger the leaves are, the bigger the clumps. You can eventually have an entire partial shade border of these things, sort of like what we do with liriope, aka monkey grass. Except it's deciduous, so it goes away for a little while and comes back. So in the winter, once the leaves die back, you can put down your light pine straw layer, keep the weeds from encroaching, and then when they bust out in spring, it's like gangbusters. So, I mean, it's a win-win there. They're also really good at holding soil, which is important on garden edges where it tends to erode away due to water and wind action. Lastly, it is a forage food, so there's a good reason to have it in your garden, and if anything, I mean, it took me a few years to figure out where to put it in the test gardens, and I ended up going with potting it up. You know, I mean, it's actually only a few feet away from the yerba buena, which I will cover in a later video. So, it's obviously very happy where it is. These plants have tripled in size since I got them, and I got them in a 4-cell pack, and now they look sort of like a pint-sized starter plant, which, you know, by the end of summer, I might not be able to see this pot, or they may outgrow the soil capacity. I may have to put them in something bigger. Yeah, I know. Such a pride. But anyway, that's all I have for you today on Bloody Dock. I hope you liked this episode. Hit the like and subscribe. Hit up the blog. If you have any questions or comments, maybe like recipes on how you use it or what you do with it, let me know. I'd love to hear it. As always, folks, keep them growing, and thank you for watching.